We're going to get started because there's so much to talk about here. Easy now. Good evening and welcome to the American University Museum at the Katzen Art Center. We are in the Alper Initiative for Washington Art. Carolyn Alper's great gift to all of us. Michael Clark, better known today as Clark Fox, has been a major figure in the Washington art world for about 50 years. Despite moving to New York in 1971, he has never really left. Fortunately for us, he continues to bounce back and forth. This exhibition, Michael Clark, Washington Artist, was conceived for the Alper Initiative for Washington Art as a way to look at the indigenous culture of Washington in the 60s, 70s, and 80s through the eyes and art of Michael Clark. And to help us do this, we have two major figures who were here in the middle. James Harithas was director of the Corcoran Gallery of Art in the 1960s, man with the hat. And Paul Richmond. Paul Richmond, art editor for the Washington Post from 1967 to 2009, and we don't want to miss him. To begin with just a simple question, maybe I'll direct it to Paul Richard. What is a Washington artist? I mean, you should know.
When Jack said he was going to call Michael, I'll have to pay Michael, a Washington artist, Michael objected. He said, being a Washington artist is box office poison. I've known Michael for 50 years, and we've been buddies for 50 years, and I think of him as a Washington artist. And I was thinking today, what qualities does he have that binds him to the city? I think, first of all, if you look around these things, there is a quietude and a calmness that was always true of this city. In New York, when everybody was splashing paint and going in the direction of Basquiat, people here were much more reserved, as our fashions are much more reserved. I thought today, driving over, that there were two or three things that Michael shares, Michael's art shares, that reminds me of Washington. One is the severity and the rigor of the geometrical armature you see in all these paintings. I always thought of Washington as a particularly geometrical city. There's the Longfall plan of the 10-mile square. We've lost a corner into Virginia, but pointing north, divided into four triangles with A, B, C, D, E Street and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Street. And that as you drive around this city, that geometry seeps into your sense of where you are. I often thought that the great sort of chevron pictures of Downing looked like the intersection of New York Avenue and the side streets coming in. That the circles that you see in Downing and in Michael's oranges had a lot to do with the DuPont Circle and the other circles that are scattered through the city. The second thing is the subtlety of Michael's color. Contemporary modern art came to Washington through Duncan Phillips. And Duncan Phillips loved art for its color. If you went to the Phillips, I used to see Michael there all the time. Nothing was hung chronologically. Duncan Phillips always hung things by how the colors were tuned. And I thought too that this city always had a minor art market compared to other cities. Jack used to be a dealer, he knows about that. What we had were the great museums. Today, Michael Clark has a show on in Washington. Who's he competing with? Cézanne's portraits. Pretty amazing you guys are here and not there, right? And it's a beautiful show, by the way. And that if you look at Michael's art, it always seemed to me to be at peace with the art of the museums. There's a little landscape from Coney Island stuck around the corner there. And I thought that always had to do with Seurat and Signac and the pointillist painters. And that the scale of Michael's pictures, the little ones, are the scale of those beautiful little French pictures you would always see, the Elsa Bruce pictures that are always just inside the door at the National Gallery, that are changing all the time. But they're not big, scare you off your feet New York paintings. They were 1-foot squares. They were well in small apartments. So I thought that this sense of belonging to the history of art that you find in Michael's pictures, not only Downing and Davis and the Corcoran, but a deeper history, the calm and quietude of his pictures, color as their major theme, and their geometry were all things that made him a Washington painter.
So, Jim, I was wondering, you met Michael in the 60s. I think just right as he was coming on the scene here. What was Washington like at that time, and what was Clark like?
Well, except for, let's
Talk into
say,
the microphone, please.
except for the National Gallery, I don't think Washington was much of an art scene when I came here. In fact, right before coming here, I had actually 2 job possibilities. One was the Corcoran and one was some other job, problem. And I called up Barnett Newman and I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well," he said, "Washington, there's nothing happening in Washington. Maybe you can get something started, but you better go down there and try to do something." So that pretty well covered it for him. Simultaneously, I was being interviewed at the Museum of Modern Art. But what he told me about the Museum of Modern Art was that the Museum of Modern Art buries its curator, so you don't even think to go on there. And I came here, it was like, well, it was the capital, it was the city. It was actually, my father's buried at Arlington, so I'd come back and forth a few times. But I didn't think, except for the color painters, which I had a vague idea about. I hadn't seen too much of it, but I was interested. I really didn't really know a whole lot about Washington, although I had the passion. I don't think a city can do anything with itself unless it has artists. So the idea of supporting artists, backing them up, doing something to build their confidence and so on. I thought that was the job of a museum curator, really. I met Michael, and then one day I was at the Corcoran, and every day at noon I would go out and buy a cheeseburger, which was, it was just something. There was a cheeseburger hamburger shop right next to the Corcoran, so on my way out I stopped at the Corcoran School to see if the students were doing anything. And there were no students there except for Michael, who was diligently working at a painting. And I looked at the painting and I thought, my God, this guy is good. Really, and he's just a student. So I invited him for a cheeseburger and he came along. And that was like the beginning of what is now a 50-year, at least 50-year friendship. What I learned very quickly about Michael was that he was a hard worker, a tremendous worker, and that he was really after something. He wasn't fooling around, he was working, and that it wasn't long before he was painting pictures of George Washington and other people, which immediately I saw George Washington, an artist painting pictures of George Washington in Washington, D.C., that should be a quick sale. Who would, but anyways, the more I've thought about his pictures, and especially the ones we see around here, the Washingtons, and also he did Abraham Lincoln's and so on. But the things that I see here is that it makes me wonder what's behind the picture. What is the substance? And what is the substance behind Washington and Lincoln and the rest of them? And then later on I began to think, why would an American Indian artist be even interested in our government? I mean, you know, we have a bad record with Indians. And I grew up part of my life in Oklahoma, and I saw Indians were really relegated to the outback. They were left out of it. But, so I began to see that in his works and the works that I've collected and lived with, there's a substance underneath that that's deeper. It's an acceptance, you know, of Washington or Lincoln or any of these people as his, or as the community, but there's always something, there's the mystery. And it's true of Michael, too. I always thought he was one of, after knowing him all these years, I always considered him one of the most mysterious artists. You know, most artists lay it out for you, and you know everything about them. You know about their parents, you know everything about them. But Michael was basically, fundamentally focused on his art, and which impressed me, because here I was a curator at the Corcoran, and I saw very clearly and very quickly that he knew more about art, its history, than I did. In fact, I used to go to him and ask questions, and he'd say, oh yeah, Cezanne did this and this on a Thursday morning when he was You know, those of you that know Clark know that he would get into, that he's a storyteller. And, but what is and for me, the enigma was the story behind his art and the underlying statements that he makes. For example, what is the story about oranges? What, you know, I don't think you grow oranges here. We do a little bit in Texas, but not here. But I began to realize that he was not only able to paint these perfectly spirited, very exceptional paintings, but with these extraordinary backgrounds. But they had a hidden meaning, and the meaning was probably had something to do with making you feel. We have an orange, and we have two oranges in our house. One is over our bed, and the other one is on the door coming in, just so it gives you a feeling of kind of acceptance, openness. I mean, what does the orange do? The orange is a great thing. So, in any case, the oranges, the Washingtons, and these architectural things that struck me as being very profound statements about a life that was deeper than what you could see on the surface. I mean, there's no question in my mind that he could paint. His ability to paint, and I've learned and collected his cards, kept his cards, and the backgrounds are some of the most interesting and advanced things I've ever seen. He's always testing himself and testing out, expressing his knowledge of history. I don't know what this puts him into, what kind of relationship this puts him into Washington, D.C. He was a formidable figure right from the beginning. I remember talking to Tom Downey, who was by that time one of the master painters of the Washington scene. And the second thing he told me was to look at Clark. Of course, I already knew about Clark, but it just struck me that an artist of that caliber would immediately look to Clark, who was a much younger figure, and say, well, he's one of us. I thought it was great. So
Can I just say one thing?
I think Jim is being modest about what he accomplished in Washington. He'd been here a few years, and the great show he did, work that he did with Sue Green at the Corcoran called Scaleless Content, had the big smoke by Tony Smith on the cover of Time magazine when everybody in America read Time magazine. There was the big Barney Newman sculpture, the pun on the Washington Monument standing outside, the one that now sits at the Manil. And things were really beginning to pop that way. I found Michael not mysterious at all, and or mystery wasn't the thing that really I liked him. I thought he was just the most entertaining and nice person to be around. He had very nice ladies in his life. He had his brother Mark was around, who had a really nice cat. And there was Mark, and Michael Clark was one of those artists in town who was not selfish. He worked for other artists. He cared about other artists. You can see the way he is greeted here by people to whom he befriended. When he ran his gallery in Georgetown, it wasn't to promote Michael Clark. It was to promote many other artists of many different kinds. And I think that he shares with Rasmussen, that there are few people who have worked in this city, Harithas is one, who have put a lot of effort not only into their own careers or their own interests, but those of other people. So I think his generosity is part of what he does.
Well, I thought Michael was a drummer. Would you like to tell your side now? Because maybe talk a little bit about the start of the 60s. By the way, the Catalogue has a really wonderful interview with Clark, so you get a chance to read it. It really is great. But you didn't, I'm sure, give everything away. That we edited quite a lot. Maybe you can slip in here.
You want the truth or the Hollywood version?
Sure, no, the Hollywood version.
I'm so happy.
You really like him.
All these people out in the dark. I'm so happy. I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. Mill. I feel like Huckleberry Finn when he was, they thought he was drowned and he went to his funeral. What this guy said, I really appreciate it. I guess I am wearing black. And I want to thank Jack. Let's have a get those hands together for Jack Rasmussen. This is the best catalog I ever got. And, you know, I did this popsicle thing. That painting there I did a couple months after the original 50 that I painted. A 6-foot high, 350-foot painting in 9 days that he did the giveaway. And so tonight, if you buy a catalog, I'm doing a giveaway. I've got 50 paintings right here. And buy a catalog and come see me, and you'll start your Clark collection. And if you don't like it, you can give it to some of your relatives. The nephew you hate, or whatever. It's a stocking stuffer. So anyway, it's so great to be here. It's very gratifying. I mean, these are two of my best buddies, Paul, and we went to anti-Vietnam deals and got tear gas and stuff like that. And Washington, you know, it's the most powerful city in the world outside of Beijing and Moscow. Let's face facts. And that's why I did a gallery here for 14 years, because I wanted to help. I wanted to continue what James started. Because after that Time magazine thing, there was a stampede. There were a lot of people moved to Washington. A lot of art types moved to Washington. Because you could only show it like it was a movie house on Connecticut Avenue. Tom Wolfe lived across the street from there when he was at the Washington Post. Did you remember him?
Before my time.
Oh, okay. But, you know, this is a wild town. There's been, you know, Walt Whitman was here, and he worked at the hospital that was now the Portrait Gallery. This is incredible. Lincoln, and you look at these photos of all these people in the Abraham Lincoln administration, and it looks like a costume, you know, the Brady photographs. It looks like Halloween, you know. But there was history that was here, and George Washington picked this place to be capital.
And Michael, you're right. Going through the Corcoran collection, there's a lot of artists came to Washington. And it was for the murals and for the portraits and the decorative schemes and everything. But and a lot were collected by the Corcoran. I mean, so there's a rich artistic tradition.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the patronage too.
Yeah, Edward Hopper came down here. He was brought down to judge some shows. He was here. They got his painting of sailing. This is unbelievable, and it was really sad that the Corcoran finally cashed in, but, you know, time...
Corcoran Biennial brought in a lot of...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then...
Hold it back on there.
You know, the Corcoran Biennial brought a lot of people and kind of introduced them to Washington for the first time.
And I wanted to say one thing about it. In Washington, it had a strange division. Sculpture was really a separate zone in Washington that belonged to the government. There were some fantastic sculptures in Washington. Hard to beat the Daniel Chester French Lincoln on the Mall, but they belonged to the government, and the statues in the cemeteries and on the circles. This was always a painting town. Duncan Phillips never collected sculpture. He had one Alexander Caltner made out of a Medaglia d'Oro coffee tin, and maybe one or two others, but he really collected paintings. When Andrew Mellon started the National Gallery, it was a gallery of paintings. There were a few statues in the halls, but it was a place for paintings. So painting, as a kind of careful thing, really dominated art here. I'm very glad for that. And when you make a painting, in some way, it joins all other paintings. I thought of the oranges that you and I have. When I bought oranges out of the first show, Michael put them in these little gold framed frames so that they looked not only like a bit like a Downing full of circles and horizontal lines, they also looked like a tabletop still life by Pito, or one of the 19th century painters you could hang above the cherrywood highboy in your house in Georgetown. So they belong not only to the present, but also to the past and to the zone of painting. And we were constantly fed new paintings as the museums here grew bigger and better over the years that we were all here. James helped to make that happen.
Moving on to the 70s. Jim, you moved to Houston.
Right.
Went to New York first, though, in '71.
Yeah, I went to New York and then I moved to Houston twice. You know, I grew up in a military family, so we were constantly moving. So I have to say that Texas was the first place that I wanted to stay, and that's what I did. Because it was, I thought it was very, I mean, talk about nothing happening. In Houston, you could mention the work art and people would look at you with a kind of, well, what are you talking about? No idea. I mean, Houston was way in the boondocks. And I think in the museum profession, if you went to Houston, that meant you were finished. Whether you had a job or not. But going to Houston and bringing Clark to Houston, he's shown with us several times, I think that helped brighten the scene down there.
And there was a strange, I was looking on Houston from here, far away. There was a strange Washington-Houston link. Peter Marzio, who was another director of the Corcoran, went to run a museum in Houston. Walter Hopps, after he was here, went to run a museum in Houston. There was a woman, I can't remember her name, from the Corcoran who went and also worked there. And
Marty Mayo.
Marty Mayo. And so that there was a sense that Houston and Washington shared. They were not LA and they were not New York.
And also Jim Dimitrian
Jim
from
Dimitrian.
Hirshhorn and
Exactly.
E.A. Carmian from the National Gallery.
So there was a kind of a bridge between them.
And you moved to New York in 1971.
Yeah, I'd gone to Pratt Institute for a little while, and I was in school with like Robert Mapplethorpe, Red Paulson, and Robert Wilson in that class, but I didn't stay very long. My father was he was an Air Force dude. He survived World War II. He was a glider pilot. He was one of the reasons I can remember everything is that in 1946, he bought a set of Encyclopedia Britannicas and had me read them at 2 years old. There's actually a photo that was in Life magazine of me reading it when I was 2.5 or something. And so he drummed all this stuff. It was like being in the military. I spent the Corcoran War in Houston in an Air Force recruiting office with my father because he was too cheap to get a babysitter. So when they tried to draft me from Nome, I said, I've already been in the Air Force for 10 years, so I don't want to go back. I don't want to re-out. So Captain Silverman gave me a Section 8, and I was able to stay. And the Corcoran kept me out of the conflict. And I was in the first grade in Houston. My relatives, both sides of my family were Cherokee mixed. I'm like only 65% Native American. But my grandfathers were real Native Americans. One of them actually was a hunter-gatherer. And everybody can do beadwork and create all this stuff. I still paint 12, 14 hours a day. I just don't get tired of doing it. And so I started, actually, my brother, Mark, we had all this paper from the Air Force, and we had a stack of drawings, like a typewriter paper, about that high. He said, man, what are we going to do? You got all this art. And I said, I divvied up some. He went up. I said, you take this side of the street, I'll do this side of the street. So I sold a cat picture of his for 25 cents in 1953. And we've been competing ever since. And he's a wild artist. I mean, we were like, I just heard this, we're Irish twins. He was born 18 months after me. People, they hear us talking and they can't, they call us the stereo twins because we have the same voice. But Marcos never liked me. And we were always, I never saw him, but we still had the same voice. It's crazy. And so anyway, it's kind of my Houston connection. I didn't, after growing up in Honolulu, Texas was not my cup of tea. I liked it better as an adult than I did as a child. And then in 1960, around the time Kennedy came in, we came up to D.C. and the first painting that I actually copied when I was like in junior high school was the Cezanne at the National Gallery on a book cover that was made out of canvas, and it was the only Cezanne that signed. And I look at that and I said, where's this guy coming from? This is a very difficult painting. It's a house in the trees. Take it from there.
Michael mentioned beadwork, and beadwork has got something of the mantra in it. It doesn't take a lot of free thought. It's not like an abstract expressionist picture or a Cezanne where Cezanne was known to have spent 25 minutes between brushstrokes deciding one the next. And when Michael was doing his pointillist stuff, once he had decided how far away the dots were and what 3 or 5 colors he would use on an area, then it was just dot, 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 dot. I used to live in the Beverly Court on Columbia Road, and Michael hung out there, and we had a visitor from far away from California. He's here today, Joe White. And Michael knew Joe very well, and Kevin McDonald was around, and Alan Bridge, and I hung out with a lot of these artists. So when Jack asked me to talk here, I called Joe and said, tell me something about Michael. And Joe said something that I thought really made sense. He can remember Michael, he said, getting on the telephone with Carol Sockwell, who some of you might remember, and talking for 3 or 4 hours while he painted. And when the last dot went on, he said, "Okay, Carol, the painting's finished. Talk to you later." So that Michael was able to do this kind of work where the conception preceded the manufacture of the painting. And that was something that Washington had that was very much unlike New York's abstract expressionism, where it was acting it out and being there in the instant. Michael's things were much more pre-planned and then executed, whether it was the popsicle or the picture.
My two favorite telephone conversations that Robin Rose had me on the line for, most of you have heard of him, for about an hour and a half, and then he goes, "Bob, are you painting?" Yeah, he said, "You son of a bitch! I've been talking to you for an hour and a half, and you went away." And the other one was I was on the phone to Carol Sockwell for about an hour and a half. I said, "Yeah, Carol, And, "No, I'm not really that big on Mark Rothko." He said, "What would Walter say? What would Walter say?" So finally he said, "Okay," he gets off the phone. About 5 minutes later, the phone rings again. I pick it up. "Carol, hi." And he goes, "What? The space shuttle just blew up." I go, "Okay, Carol, thank you. I hung up the phone. 15 minutes later, I go, "The space shuttle just blew up." So I go down to my doorman, I said, "They said the space shuttle just blew up." "Yeah, did you hear about that?" And that was the way he knew, just like, Carol was something else. A great artist. And we got people, Will Bruner and I were at the Corcoran the day after Kennedy was assassinated in Saturday school, and we've been friends ever since. And, it's just great. A lot of relationships, people around here really, they're the real deal. Where New York is all like, if you can't do something for me, lose my telephone number. Do lunch by yourself. So I've been living in the same building for like about 47 years, and I voted in New York, but I don't consider myself in New York. Thank you.
Can I ask Michael a question?
Go ahead.
Frames. How do you decide whether to put a frame on a window fixture or not? There are 3 little ones that have a frame, here are 3 that don't have frames. I thought, maybe the bigger ones don't have frames, and this one does. I wonder, how do you make the call?
Well, frankly, every story is, I could talk for hours, so I won't bore you, but, went back to some of Harithas's Corcoran biennials. He brought these amazing people to Washington, and I actually got to know some of them, and would hang out with them in New York or whatever, and, one of them was Joe Bear. I was always very partial to women artists. Joan Mitchell, who James really did, she was a very underrated artist. He got her going, and now she's like, they're going for millions and millions. And I'd hang out with Jo Bear, and she actually, I don't know whether it was being cheap or whatever, but painted on the sides of the painting, so you didn't have to put a frame on them. So like paintings like that, you can see some of them that aren't on frame go around the edge.
Right.
So in a way, it gave a three-dimensional kind of thing, and even if they have kind of an Edward Hopper quality, the little ones, there's no reflection in any of Edward Hopper's paintings. And so I just put the glass on top of the painting instead of having it in the windows. And so like photorealists would put all the reflections in and everything. And framing's gotten really expensive, so there are, if you shop at Blick, you can get things that are stretched around the edge, and you can get away with no frame. It's really good. So if I had the dough, I'd probably put them all in big gold frames.
So I really started to see a lot of your work at Harry Lund, and that was a pretty interesting period. I think you were doing a lot of the architectural work there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, Harry Lund, it was kind of funny because I was over at Frank Wright's studio talking to Frank Wright, and Harry Lund came in, and Frank, very loquacious guy, and he introduced me to Harry Lund. He treated me like a blowfish. So then somebody's telling me from New York, hey, this guy Harry Lund would like to take you to lunch. And I said, Yeah, okay, thanks, bye. And so finally, through another guy who ended up being an agent of mine, and actually was the guy that raised all the money for PS1 for Alana Heights, arranged a lunch. We ended up at this place where there were French waiters on roller skates. And I used to go, when I lived in Key West, I was always staking out Tennessee Williams' house, but I never got to see Tennessee. So here I am in this French restaurant, and there's Tennessee Williams sitting with one of these woman that Andy Warhol hung out with here that never had anything to do with some society lady. And so he had a stack of photos, like about 50 photos in a photo box, and it was like, you know this one, you know this one. I got all 50 of them. And then he goes, are you into astrology? And I go, no. And he said, you think it's bloated, don't you? And I said, well, I don't know. And so he goes, I think you know more about astrology than you're living on. Really? And he said, what sign am I? I go like, Taurus. And he's like, what? You know, he was in the gallery. And so then he says, what sign are you? And I said, guess. So he goes, I said, no, he said, oh, I know. He said, what sign are you? And I said, Mickey Mouse with Pluto rising. That made him even madder. So he goes, I said, I'll take a guess. So he goes around, there's no more signs. And I said, you missed one. And that was my sign, which I'm not going to tell you. Everybody be running for the door. So then I was with the gallery. It was like backed by the CIA, and I got Joe White in the gallery, I got Kevin McDonald. I actually got Jacob Kanan. I was at another lunch at the place, and he says, finally, Ruth Kanan said, you know, could you ask Harry to show Jacob? So I go, I'll give it a go. So I'm sitting there, and finally, after 3 martinis, 2 bottles of wine, and a cognac, I said, Harry, why don't we show Jacob Kanan? He rolls his eyes and goes, please, Clark, give me a break. Well, anyway, he finally took it. And so Harry and I had sort of a combative relationship because he got me and Kevin were, you know, avowed socialist. I was a Maoist. I can't remember what he was, closer to anarchist, this side of John Waters. And Harry was like this guy, like one of the Watergate burglars. He was like a super ultra right winger. So he really hated us, but we made the gallery look like it was like he'd gone, you know, over to the other side from being, you know, that he wasn't doing CIA stuff, which he still was. So I got a paycheck, and I actually had a gallery, Ivan Karp, who was discovered all Andy Warhol. Joe White and I used to hang there. He had free lunch. And Alan Vega, who was in the band Suicide, so he got Joe and me and Alan Vega, and he had these fancy people, and we'd be eating these fancy bologna sandwiches while Ivan, with the shades on and cigar, was like, this artist only do 1 painting a year, you know? And it was so funny because we were getting free lunch, and Ivan's kind of taught me how to sell art. And so it was always really exciting, you know, kind of. And then Harry, you know, moved to New York. He kind of sold out everything, and went on to fame and fortune in Paris.
Perhaps we should open this up to some questions from the audience. Yes. Wait, hold it.
Hi, Mr. Clark. My name is Todd Wiggins. I recall seeing your work in some of the Friend galleries as a poster, particularly this piece here. I wanted to ask you if you were influenced by the postmodernist architecture movement that was very popular during the 80s and going almost into the 90s with this particular piece. I subtly think it might have something to do with the now Trump Hotel, just because of the detail. Is that accurate to say?
That's actually, glad you brought that up. Thank you. That one was actually me, the philanthropist, through Mary Swift, who was did the Washington Review, great lady, blah blah. She was also real big with Washington Project for the Arts at the time. So they got this bright idea to get Clark to do some thing for the opening of the post office. That's how they made this, ended up with a poster. And so I donated $100,000 they made off that print. They went for $1,000 a piece. And then they made a poster out of it 25,000 posters. If you brought your subway ticket in, you get a free poster. They were gone in 8 hours. Like, there's a lot of Clarks floating around. Actually, I had a portfolio of my architecture that was mostly bought by architects. I actually influenced postmodernism. The dude that did my printing actually ended up marrying Michael Graves, the person who did all the Michael Graves stuff, and he moved to Princeton. And so, and then there were all these architecture prints, everybody like Haas and all these famous architects. I actually spent about 4 hours with that lady that just died, Hadid, you know, the famous Syrian architect. Yeah, I was waiting to get on the press, and I got 4 hours with her alone, and he ended up printing all these people because they saw my prints, all these architects and models. So that's that story.
Well, you should have a gold frame now.
You can leave your donations at the door.
So, any other questions? Comments? Yes.
I don't want to ask a stupid question.
There you go. Please.
I didn't want to ask Michael a stupid question, but I've always wondered, Michael, why windows?
Well, I'm sorry you asked that question. I wanted to be an architect. I couldn't do math. Which leads to another story where I had a studio over in Alexandria, because part of the George Washington thing was I went to high school in Alexandria, which was George Washington's hometown, and everything was this and that. I thought I was going to be a portrait painter, so I always had an eating disorder, so I would, instead of buying lunch, I would do copies of George Washington on paper. And I had a studio with Jack Fisk, who is one of the leading set designers in Hollywood, and David Lynch. And I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I was so broke I ended up being a painter. But I remember we were doing a critique, and I told Lynch and Fisk, I said, you know, painting's cool, but movies is where it's really at. David Lynch was just staring at me like this tone look thing, you know. And then the movie Blue Velvet, when I saw it, was like being in Francis C. Hammond High School. That was David Lynch playing the pervy voyeur, and so it was really wild. And we all went to the Corcoran, and they worked at a drugstore with Jim Morrison, who ended up being the lead singer of the Doors. So I used to see Jim Morrison in the neighborhood. So it was really kind of wild childhood.
So that's why the windows.
I couldn't be an architect, so I decided to be an architect. I couldn't afford film. They tried to get me to come to Hollywood to work with them because we decorated a thing in Manioc, Pennsylvania, a disco that didn't last very long. They had a Lumia. Lumia did this big thing there, like a 40-foot Lumia thing. It was really wild, and they knew I could really work, so they wanted me to come to Hollywood and work with them, but I don't drive. I saw Breakfast at Tiffany's and Mickey Rooney and the Cat, and that's where I wanted to be, where the people were. You know. So I ended up in New York, and I've never driven a car. So I couldn't go to Hollywood.
Any other questions?
They never usually have any questions.
They're speechless, I think.
What more they can say?
I could ask another question. Actually.
Okay.
I'm fascinated with your work, first of all.
Oh, thank you.
But I wanted to ask you, since you could put us in the context of being in New York and seeing some of the highly influential
Artists that were prominent in that collection, and also some of whom were commercial artists, such as George Stradivarius, which I know you must know him because of his architectonic effects. Had you thought about taking inanimate objects and mix them with living objects to create sort of a dynamic between those two? Because I noticed that you kept them separate in your portraiture as well as your figurative pieces versus your architectural influence pieces.
Well, this is my early work. I've been, I don't even know how many works I've done, but I love art history, and I kind of love the idea of artists. A lot of artists aren't that much fun to hang out with, but I hunted down, I met Edward Hopper, I met Marcel Duchamp, I met George O'Keeffe, I met Calder, Joseph Cornell, and it really got me going, so it was sort of like, why didn't he just write tragedies? He wrote comedies. And I had a big fight with Gene Davis because he said you only could stick with your signature. He was yelling at me. And I said,
He was saying that to you?
yeah, you can't change your signature. And he couldn't get over with his other work anymore. He really wanted to be an expressionist. And he was stuck doing stripes, which are great stripes. And it's funny, but I just want to say an article that, now people couldn't believe that just one person painted 50 paintings in 9 days. They thought these students did it. And I went in to hear, I wanted to hear Gene Davis's color theory, and he didn't have one, but the students' work looked like Sam Gilliam's before they got hung on the wall. And so Gene said to Ed McGowan and me, I can't sign this shit. And so then I told my friend at the time, I said, how long is it going to be before the telephone rings? So that's how I ended up painting them. And the latest issue, which you can get from the Archives of American Art, it's a whole story behind the popsicle thing. It's a huge article, very fascinating, because part of the reason I changed from being a color painter was that that was sort of the end of modernism, the beginning of conceptualism, and postmodernism. So I was right at that juncture of where everything changed, and it was like, if I'm going to stick with this, blah, blah, blah. So I always have incorporated conceptualism behind all my work. There's a concept. And a lot of my things is kind of in the woo-woo department. Like I was channeling for Downing and Surratt, and a lot of the artists really loved the Phillips collection and the Corcoran. And part of my small scale was that you don't need to work big. And I did a 30 by 40 inch George Washington, that when I had this show at a big museum in Delaware, they actually blew the painting out to like 20 by 30, 40 feet. And, it proves that, now with modern technology, all my stuff can be blown up to any size. I don't have to paint big, and I don't, the storage problem with big paintings.
I just wanted to put a word in for George. When I was writing at the Post, I also covered art news as well as reviewing it. And I wrote many stories about the big kerfuffle when the Athenaeum portrait by Gilbert Stuart of George Washington was being fought over. Mrs. Washington, after seeing Gilbert Stuart's portrait of her husband, thought it would be really nice to have one at home. And she commissioned Gilbert Stuart to do a portrait of George. And he liked it so much, it was a life portrait, that he never finished it and kept it and copied it many times. And eventually ended up in the Athenaeum in Boston, who didn't want all the crowds to come to see it, so wanted the dollar bill. So he lent it to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. And the Athenaeum decided they wanted to cash in on it and get some money from it. And the government didn't want him to sell it to the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, so they eventually decided it would be split between the portrait gallery here and the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. It moves back and forth between these two museums. So when Michael started painting his Georges, it was constantly in the news. And that picture was not only in your wallet, it was also in the Post all the time. So it had a familiar kind of ring to it.
Hi, I have a question for Harithas. All this conversation about the Washington Color School, and do you consider Sam Gilliam and Clark the second generation of the Washington Color School? Did you hear me?
Do you consider Sam Gilliam and Michael Clark second generation Washington Color School.
Was the second generation necessary?
They're always talking about it, so.
I thought of them as striking out on their own, and I knew Sam very well, and as well as Clark in the early days. And it looked like to me that he was trying to find his own way, and to create his own movement, really, and I think both of them did in a way. I just wanted to say one thing about Clark that I just remembered. Because I'm totally fascinated with the American Indian part. It's the 65% of him. That's the interest me. It interests me. I have had a lot of interest in American Indians, and I always felt that we had an obligation to American Indians to do something in some cases. And inevitably, I always tried to do American Indian shows, and exhibitions, and whatever, ceremonies, whatever. I always tried to keep that connection because I think it's so fundamental to America. So anyways, so this is the story. On one occasion, Charlie Carr came to Houston, and of course he stayed at our house. And he was fooling around in the kitchen, and minutes after he went into the kitchen, everything went crazy. The air conditioning went out, the lights went out, all of the electronics were gone. Nothing. I mean, this is Houston in the middle of a horribly hot summer, and everything was completely wiped out. And I said, it really cost 20. I mean, our air conditioning system completely blew, and the rest of it. I said, Clark, I mean, how did you do this? He said, well, I'm an American Indian, and we're not very good around that kind of electronic stuff. I thought that was extraordinary.
I do have some strange powers. Try not to cross me.
Well, we're so grateful to have Paul and Jim and Clark here, and thank you very much for this talk.
You kind of have to have it if you're going to do any close-up stuff.